Okay, let's wrap up chapter 17, the cost approach on page 401. In your formula packets, you might want to dig that out. On page 10, you have the 3 steps to performing the cost approach. So far, we've talked about the sales comparison approach, which you use to value what kind of property? Residential vacant land. We've talked about the income capitalization approach, which you use to value what kind of property?
Income producing.
Income producing property. So what are we left with by process of elimination? Special use properties. Special use properties we value using the cost approach. A good question would be, why do we even care what the value of a special use property is? Because we're never going to sell the thing. How many times do you see a school go up for sale? Or a library?
Church.
Sometimes churches. The big reason we want to put a value on these properties is for insurance purposes. We need to be able to value these things if for no other reason than for insurance purposes. So that's one of the primary considerations in having an approach to value for this type of property. Okay? So the cost approach has 3 steps, and they give them to you in your book on page 401 and 402. They make it 5 steps. I make it 3. So in your packet of formulas there, the 3 steps, number 1, value the land as if it's vacant. Well, how do we value vacant land?
We use the thing we learned at the beginning.
We use the thing we learned at the beginning, according to Leanne, which is called the what?
The comparison.
The sales comparison approach. That's exactly right. We use the sales comparison approach to value vacant land. So we're going to pretend like this piece of land that it sits on is vacant. The reason for that is it's very easy to compare with other pieces of vacant land. Okay? So step 1 of the cost approach actually is to use the sales comparison approach. Value the land as if it's vacant. Step 2 is going to be to add the replacement cost of the improvements or the structure. Now, let me fill you in on a little secret here. The book will tell you it's either to add the replacement or reproduction cost, something called a reproduction cost. Now I want to talk to you about that idea of a reproduction cost versus a replacement cost, because you might see it on the test. For math purposes, this is the formula. You're never going to get a reproduction cost math question. They're always going to deal with replacement cost. And they're always going to deal with a specific type of replacement cost, which is the simplest one. It's called the square foot method. You've already done the square foot method, you just don't know it. Remember when we were adjusting for living area for square footage on the sales comparison approach?
Yes.
Where they said that square footage was valued at a certain dollar per square foot? That's the square foot method. Okay? And we use that in replacement cost. So if we have, for example, a 4,000 square foot building that's valued at $80 a square foot, we're going to simply multiply 4,000 times 80 for a replacement cost of $320,000. Does everybody follow that line of thinking? Now, from an academic standpoint, we need to talk about the difference between replacement and reproduction, though, real quickly. And this is on page 402 in your textbook. The difference between reproduction cost and replacement cost. Replacement cost is, remember that we're doing this for insurance purposes, right? So we're doing this to value it until the thing burns down. We need to know how much it's worth if it burns down, or blows away, or blows up, whatever. Replacement cost is simply going to replace it with a similar style and function building using whatever the current construction methods are. So if this building were to burn down, they're not going to come back and try to find that glorious chandelier from 1982 that's out there in the lobby and reproduce that thing. They're going to rebuild this building with today's finishes, right? And most of us would view that as an improvement. But that's a replacement. A replacement is taking it and replacing the function and size of it without really a consideration for recreating the thing. What do you think a reproduction is?
build exactly the same.
You build exactly the same thing, exactly as it sat before. When in real estate would that be important? Historic properties. Any kind of historic property is going to be valued using a reproduction cost versus a replacement. Reproduction is tremendously more expensive than replacement is. So most properties we're going to be talking about replacement, and when we do the math equation, we're certainly going to be talking about the replacement cost piece. Okay? Is everybody good with that? And specifically the square foot version of replacement cost, because that's the easiest, least complex way to determine a replacement cost. So back to my formula over here. Number one, value the land as if it's vacant. Number two, add in the replacement cost of the structure. And then number three, subtract depreciation of the structure. So depreciation is a loss of value, right? Would you agree that this building depreciates on an annual basis? It loses some of its residual value based on the pipes got a year older, the HVAC system's got a year older. Every system in here is older, the building's more dated, it's less desirable. Would you agree with that?
The building, yes.
The building itself
Yes.
is less desirable year over year over year, assuming you leave it exactly the same. That process, that natural evolution is called depreciation, okay? And so we want to talk about how to calculate that depreciation. So before we go back to our big formula over there, let's talk about how we calculate something called straight line depreciation. Straight line depreciation just means that the property depreciates at a consistent amount year over year over year. Okay? There's not a bell curve going on or something fancy. It just means the property loses a certain percentage of its value year over year. But there's some terminologies you need to be familiar with. Number one, you need to be familiar with something called the, I'm trying to think of the best way for me to explain this. I don't want to talk about effective age first. You need to be familiar with the expected lifespan of a building. The expected period of time that the building is going to remain useful for what it was intended for. We call that the economic life of the property.
So like how many years you've been using it versus how many years?
Well, the
it's supposed to
economic
last?
life is how many years it's supposed to last. Not how many years it's going to last and be upright. How many years it's expected to be useful for the reason it was constructed. Why was this building constructed? To be what?
Office.
An office building. So we only expect that it will be useful as an office building for a certain number of years. And we know that's the case because how many times do you see buildings that were built for one purpose that have been abandoned for that purpose because they no longer suit it, and they're being used as just warehouse space or storage or something like that. We see that all the time, right? Because places, shopping centers, malls,
Car dealerships.
car dealerships, yeah, that's a good one. You know, you'll see Walmart buildings, right? They've been in one building for 15, 20 years, and then you think they're closing down. No, they're not closing down. They're building another one right across the street, and they're going to abandon this building and go to that one. So that building's economic life has expired. It's no longer useful for the purpose that it was intended for. Does it still have some purpose? Sure. Does it? Is it still upright? Sure. It may still be in perfect shape, but its economic life has expired. Las Vegas has the shortest economic lives in the world. You know, the hotels in Las Vegas have the shortest economic lifespan of any major buildings in the world, about 20 years on average. And they blow them up. Did they blow one up this morning?
They did.
Oh, wow. What did they implode today?
I can't remember which one it was. It was like two, and it was only like
Maybe the Riviera. Maybe the real. I know they were tearing the rib down. So the economic life is how long we expect it to remain economically useful. It's in a number of years. So I'm just going to give you an example here. Let's say we have an economic life of 60 years. Okay? Now we want to talk about something called the effective age. Now the effective age is different than the actual age, just like the economic life is different than the actual lifespan. The actual lifespan is how long we expect the thing to stay upright, right? Whereas the economic life is how long we expect it to be what? Useful for what it was intended for. The actual age is how old it really is. The effective age is how much of that economic life is gone. Now that sounds like the same thing, but it's really not, because here's what can happen. Can the effective age of a building be changed? How?
Updates.
Yes, renovate it. If we came through and we gutted this building and put brand new finishes, we just retiled, new light fixtures, new whole 9 yards everywhere, the effective age of this building would be rolled backwards. Because now we would say that that building has more of those years remaining of expected useful life because of the updates. Does that make sense for everybody? So we haven't increased the economic life. What we've done is actually rolled back the effective age. Does that make sense for everybody? So the economic life is going to stay the same always, but the effective age can change. If we don't maintain the building, can we accelerate the economic life? The effective age. Yes, if we don't maintain the building, we're going to rush ahead into how much. So, the economic life is how long it's going to last. The effective age is how much we've used. Everybody follow that? The great thing about straight line depreciation is it's just the effective age divided by the economic life. Because what we say is, let's say the effective age of this building is 26 years. We have used 26 out of how many? 60. There's your depreciation right there. 26 divided by 60. What's the depreciation percentage? 43.33%. So what we would say is that building is 43.33% depreciated. Does that make sense for everybody? How that works? So let's look at our formula over here and let's talk about a building that we might be trying to value. So here's an example of a question we might get. We have an 8,000 square foot warehouse located on 2 acres of land. And here are the factors they give us about that property. Number one, land sells for $250,000 per acre in that area. Number two, the replacement cost per square foot of a warehouse in that area is $50 per square foot. And number three, that warehouse has utilized 22 years of its expected economic life of 70 years. So what's its effective age? It's used 22. What's the effective age?
22.
22. So it's used 22 years of 70, which is its economic life. We have everything we need to know in order to calculate the replacement value of that property right there. So let's take a look at it. What does step one say we need to do?
Value the land.
Value the land. What do they tell us about the land? It is how many acres?
2.
2. And land is valued at how much per acre in that area?
$250,000.
$250,000. So $250,000 per acre times 2 acres. I've got a land value of $500,000, $500,000. Right? Step 2, we want to add the replacement cost of the structure. What do we know about the structure first and foremost? It's 8,000 square feet. So it's going to be 8,000 times something. And how much does a square foot cost to reconstruct in that area?
$50.
$50 a square foot. So what's the replacement cost of my structure, or replacement value of my structure? $400,000. And step 3 is that I'm going to subtract the depreciation of just the what? The structure. Because guess what does not depreciate, folks? Land does not depreciate. So you don't want to do the addition step and then do your depreciation. You want to do just depreciation of the structure itself. So what do we know about the structure? It is 22 years into its 70-year economic life. So that's going to be 22 divided by 70. What percent depreciated is that property?
31.4.
31.4%? 31.4% of what?
$400,000.
Of $400,000. And what is that number?
125,600.
125,600? So now, to come up with a cost value for that structure, for that property, we're simply going to take the land value of $500,000. We're going to add the replacement cost of the building, $400,000, so we're up to $900,000, right? And then what's the last step? Subtract out $125,600.
Could you do it the
Can
same
you
way?
mark-
I think the math comes out the same. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
can, like if it's like when you're doing it and you know you just want subtract, can you put 2 and 3 as 1 to subtract from number 1? Or add to number 1, I mean, sorry.
If you want to do 2 and 3 and then add a number, sure.
You see what I'm saying, like,
Yeah.
I was gonna ask if you took the $400,000 divided by the 70 years and then multiply it by the 26 years you've used.
By the 22
22
years you've used, yes, you can do that. Yes, because that's good. You're going to get an annual dollar depreciation that way, and then you multiply it times 22 years. It's the same thing. The same thing. You could also, if you want to do another way, because you have a calculator that has a percent button on it, you could simply go. Once you've gotten to 31.4%, you could take your calculator and go $400,000 minus 31.4% plus $500,000 if you wanted to. You know, you could reorder it that way, and that's going to work for you. As long as you, here's the key to this process. Make sure you only depreciate the structure. The most common mistake is going to be to depreciate add the 500 and 400 together and then take depreciation of that entire amount. That's the most common mistake. And you don't want to do that because the land itself is not going to depreciate. The idea here being that once that building has an economic or an effective age of 70 years, what's going to be the value of this property? Just the land. Because the building itself is going to be depreciated to 0 at that point. Everybody follow that line of thinking? Okay? All right. So let me point out a couple of other things I need to mention in this section about cost approach in your book. And I'm also going to point out some things you don't need to pay attention to. Over on page 403, they give you the other ways of calculating replacement cost in addition to the square foot method. You notice there's replacement cost, and then there's the square foot method is number 1, and there's other stuff under there. There's other stuff under there. That's what you need to know. What you need to know about replacement cost is, for your purposes, it's always going to be the square foot method. It's also the least accurate method. These other ones that they mentioned here, the unit in place method, the quantity survey method, they are much more accurate, but you as a real estate broker are not going to have the capability of, I mean, like for example, the quantity survey method, the way you would value that structure is, we need 4,387,000 board feet of lumber, we need 6,550 man hours of labor, we need 4,000 miles of pipe, we need, you know, you're breaking everything down into how many pounds of nails you need. Nobody does that. Actually, one entity does that. The United States federal government has that information, and they use the quantity survey method to value their properties. Nobody else has that kind of information. Everybody else uses the square foot method. So when you go through this, what you need to know is, for math purposes, it's always going to be replacement cost. But you need to know what reproduction cost is. So what is reproduction cost?
If we're trying to reduce the building needs there.
If you're trying to reconstruct it exactly, and it's mostly going to be for historic properties, right? Everything else is going to be replacement cost. And what method of replacement cost are you most likely to use?
Square foot.
The square foot method. The other methods are more accurate, but the square foot method is going to be the one you use. Now, under depreciation, we talked about how to do the math of depreciation. This is the only depreciation math you have to know, is the straight line depreciation. But you need to know how to refer to. So I would start on the bottom of page 403. You need to know these terminologies down here. You need to know the difference between deterioration and obsolescence. Okay? It's sort of like the difference between a misrepresentation and an omission. Remember when we talked about that a long time ago in the class? We said a misrepresentation is when you say something that's wrong, and omission is when you don't say anything at all. Well, in this case, it's sort of the same sort of comparison. You need to decide first, is it deterioration or is it obsolescence? Okay? Deterioration means something's breaking down. It's broken, it's breaking, it needs repair. That's what deterioration is. Obsolescence means there's nothing really wrong with it, but people still don't want it. Both of these are forms of depreciation. Okay? So give me an example of deterioration in a
Paint.
property.
Paint.
Paint could be deterioration. What else?
Carpet,
Carpet. What else?
roof,
A roof. Foundation. Falling down could be deterioration. How about examples of obsolescence?
Hardware in a house.
Hardware in a house. Brass. Would brass be an example of obsolescence? Shiny, yellow, bright, blind you, brass. Yes. Don't do that. Please.
having a big house with one bathroom.
Having a 5-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, that would be an obsolescence, right?
No AC.
Maybe a sunken living room might even be considered an obsolescence now. Anything that's not necessarily broken about a property but makes it undesirable is considered obsolescence. So now let's break those down a little bit further. Deterioration comes in 2 forms. Physical deterioration comes in 2 forms. It comes in the curable form and the incurable form. Now, those don't mean what you think they mean. It's easy to say curable means I can fix it and incurable means I can't fix it. The thing of it is with properties, folks, there's no such thing as I can't fix it. You can fix anything. It's the how much it costs. Is it economically feasible to fix it? If you throw enough money at it, you can always fix it. But would I spend $100,000 to fix a property that's going to be worth $50 once it's fixed? And the answer is no. So anything that's deteriorated to the point where fixing it doesn't make financial sense, that's called an incurable physical deterioration. Whereas a leaky roof would probably be considered a curable physical depreciation, deterioration, because it's worth making that repair. Good on that? Obsolescence also can be curable or incurable. Something, and when we talk about obsolescence, we're talking about functional obsolescence. Brass fixtures that Leanne mentioned, is that a curable or an incurable functional obsolescence?
Curable.
Curable. 5 bedrooms and 1 bathroom that Tracy mentioned is probably closer to an incurable functional obsolescence. My grandparents' house, my late grandparents' house, is a very incurable functional obsolescence. My grandfather died in the house he was born in. Not many people have that experience any longer. That farm has been in our family for 175 years. It's a long time. That house has been there a long time. it looks and feels like it's been there a long time. There are 7-foot ceilings in an entire house, and my grandmother, who was 5 foot nothing, insisted on putting ceiling fans in every room. Can you imagine me walking through a house that has 7-foot ceilings and ceiling fans? I literally walk through the house like this all the time. That house is a 3-bedroom house. You know how many hallways there are in the house? 0.
You go from room to room.
You go from room to room. Every bedroom has 2 doors. One in on this side and one out on the other side. If you get in the 3rd bedroom, which is the master bedroom, you got to walk through the first 2 to get to it. And the doors are in the middle of the wall. You walk into the room, I'm in the middle of somebody's bedroom. Hey. Now I'm in the middle of somebody else's bedroom. Hi. Now I'm in my bedroom. I got to go to the bathroom. Hello again. You can't fix that. Well, you could, I suppose, but the cost would be astronomical, and it wouldn't be worth it for some house in Edgecombe County. Does that make sense? That's a very... I'm sorry?
There's probably no closets either.
There are no closets. It was built with no bathroom. There is one bathroom. It's a very efficient bathroom, I will say that. You can do all 3 S's without moving. You can literally sit on the toilet, wash your hands in the sink, and the tub is right here beside your leg. It's like maybe 4x4 area. The whole bathroom. One bathroom. It's functionally obsolete, and that's an incurable functional obsolescence because the cost of trying to make that livable by today's standards would just be astronomical. Everybody follow that? Whereas the functional obsolescence of having dated fixtures is a very curable functional obsolescence. So curable, incurable just means, is it economically feasible to make that change or make that repair? And then you get to the last type of obsolescence, which is on page 404, called an economic obsolescence. And it's also called an external obsolescence. That's always incurable because it's something outside of the property that's making it be undesirable. If, for example, somebody puts a trash dump next door to your house, does that make your house a little bit obsolete? Where people are not going to desire that property? Yes. Can you do anything about that? Because it's not your trash dump, not your property. The answer is no. So that's considered always incurable. Economic obsolescence or external obsolescence is always incurable because you can't control it. That is it for valuation. It's a long chapter. It's a lot of math, mostly math. There's some material there, but it's mostly math. How many approaches to value do we have? 3. Sales comparison approach for our residential and vacant land. The income capitalization approach for our income producing properties. And don't forget that gross rent multiplier is part of the income producing property family. Make sure you study both of those and you're familiar with both of those. And make sure, just as an aside, because maybe I've been around and done this a few times, particularly in things like gross rent multiplier, they like to throw in words like duplex and triplex and quadruplex, you know. I have what's the gross rent multiplier of a triplex with unit rent of $400 per month? Well, what's your gross rent going to be when you plug it into that formula?
Times 3.
It's going to be that times 3 because it's a triplex. So make sure you're very careful when you're dealing with gross rent multipliers like that because they like to throw that curveball at you. So you need to be very comfortable with the math of doing the sales comparison approach and making the adjustments. You need to be very comfortable with doing the income capitalization approach, both the big version, ERV, and the stripped down version, which is the gross rent multiplier. And then you need to be able to do a cost approach. Now I know we did the cost approach at the end. Do you guys feel comfortable that you can do the cost approach? Now you have one, I'm going to let you take it with you tonight, but your last question in your packet there is a cost approach to value. And you can certainly email me and ask me if you got it right or if you have questions. But remember, stick with the 3 steps. Value the land as if it's vacant, calculate the replacement cost of the structure, and then subtract the depreciation of the structure out. The cost approach is the easiest of the 3 to do the math. Okay? The hardest of the 3 to do the math, I think, is the sales comparison approach, and that's really not because the math is hard, that's because you'll adjust in the wrong direction. That's where your hands come in
It's so
handy,
fiddly.
you know? And it is fiddly. I mean, it's very, you're looking at, make sure you write down things correctly first, right? I mean, yesterday Isaiah did all the math right, but he wrote down deck instead of screen porch. So he adjusted based on what he wrote down, and he had just transferred the information incorrectly, and it caused his answer to be off. So you have to be real careful with the sales comparison approach, right? Give you an idea of timing for the remainder of the class, right? First of all, it is now time for you to order your background check, okay? Has anybody, I know Karen, you said you were going to order yours. Anybody else started that process? Okay? So I'm going to give you the website to go to get that process started, because the Real Estate Commission is going to require you to have a criminal background check on file, so that when you pass, in a week, nobody said anything that, right? So that when you pass this exam a week from Monday, we can report you to the commission, and you'll be ready to go to take the state license exam. You are going to go to ncreccheck.com.
If we've had one in the last 2
Nope.
months. Okay.
The answer is always no. They require you to go through their provider for it.
How long is it valid?
It's only valid for getting your real estate license. So
Like, how long, like, if I did that and I waited 2 months to do the license?
that's fine. If you wait 2 months to do the license exam, I will come beat you with my shoe though. Because you will have a 0% chance of passing said license exam, and that will reflect on my record. So if you're going to wait 2 months, do me a favor and wait 180 days, because you don't count on my scores anymore after 180
They'll
days.
loan me the money to take the test?
You have to, if you're going to have a delay, if you're going to have, seriously, and I'm joking with her obviously, but seriously, if you're going to have a delay, before you go take it again, come back to me. We need to do practice exams. We need to do, because this, I'm telling you, it's like a bucket of water that's got holes in it, and you're trying to hold your fingers over the holes, you know? You only gonna hold it in there so long, and it's just all of a sudden, it just goes. That's the way this information works, because you got so much of it crammed in there in this class. So it is the statistics for what people do on this exam fall off of a cliff after 30 days. I mean, it's like, you would not believe how badly people do after just 30 days. So you want to have this done so you're ready to go.
So is it ncreccheck.com?
.com. ncreccheck.com. Now, update on rest of the class, game plan for the rest of the class. We have 4 classes left. I'm finally done with you. I'm just kidding. Now we're going to miss you so much. Thursday night we will do, so you know what to read. We will do taxation, which I believe is 19, right? 18 is insurance. You don't read insurance. You don't need it. It's not tested. So chapter 19 you do need to read, and that's what, and we will cover on Thursday night chapter 19 and chapter 22. Okay? It is not that we're not doing 20 and 21. We are, but I'm going to do them the following week, and here's why. 19 and 22 are the last chapters that have math in them. Okay? I would like to finish the math of the class on Thursday night, and I'm going to give you a big, very comprehensive math review for you to take home over the weekend. So that way, if you do that over the weekend, if you're having problems with the math, we have all of next week to get that addressed for you. Okay? I don't want to give you the math review the last weekend before your exam, and you're scrambling trying to figure out and panic and you don't know how to do it. I want to give it to you this week so that you have next week to get any kinks worked out. Okay? Something like 60 questions, I think, is what's in the math review. It's a lot of math. It'll take you a while to do it, but it's practice of every type of math that we've had in the class. So my plan is to give you that on Thursday night, but to do that, we need to get through chapters 19 and 22. 19 is real estate taxation, so capital gains taxes specifically, and some income taxes that we talk about. So make sure you've read that chapter. It will really help to read that chapter in advance. And then 22, you don't really need to read that in advance. Just come to class ready to do that's profit and loss math and return on investment math. Okay? So we're going to do that on Thursday night. So Thursday night's going to be all math. All right? And then the following week, on Monday night, we will work on fair housing and environmental issues. On Tuesday night, we will work on license law and start kind of reviewing things. And on Thursday night will be for odds and ends questions, reviews, test taking strategies, that sort of thing. I will also be here this Sunday and the following Sunday.
9:30?
9:30 again. We did chapters 1 through 5 this past Sunday. And I think the folks that were here will tell you it was beneficial. We will plan on picking up with chapter 6 this Sunday, and hopefully get, maybe through chapter 10, probably that 5-chapter-a-week clip, which would put us having reviewed through like chapter 15 on the Sunday mornings by the time you take the exam. The idea being you shouldn't really need much of a review on past 15 because it's so recent for you. Okay? You can go.
Will you check my email?
Yeah.